not only, to me, it's a double-edged sword, what you just said. Because the simplicity of it, and it really is.
Yeah.
And the fact that it doesn't require much. Oftentimes it's the stroke of a pen.
Well, that's the problem, because they can't afford for us to know it's that simple. Because what will happen, Magatte, in my country and yours, if they were to approach it the way you just described, with the fact that it's really very simple, they would lose in their mind power. Because
Hi, my name is Joseph Patterson. Welcome to One Jamaica TV. This is the place of choice for all who love this country and want to see the nation succeed.
Because the way socialistic system works, they keep back everybody because some can't run fast enough. You have to stop some of us from doing so well, because if we do so well, you're going to have income disparity. You're going to have income inequality. As if the goal in life is for us to have income equality. That's not the goal. The goal in life is to respect your rights and my rights to make choices for myself.
Exactly. No, and I like to, it's exactly what it is. And I like to tell people too that the problem in that system where they want everybody to end up in the same place, like you said with Usain Bolt, the problem with that view of a world is your weakest link, and I say it with all respect, your weakest link becomes the highest target. Like basically, nobody can do more. Nobody can do more than what the person who can do the least can. And that's tremendous. Yeah, it's really unfair.
I went to Cuba, right? I went to Cuba some time ago, and I was talking to some people there and trying to figure out what was going on, because they're lovely people, well-educated people, really bright people, smart people. I think they could do very, very well. But they're all living in this most of who I saw were living in these very old places that really needs to be completely refurbished, whatever. But they didn't own the property, for one. They could not earn more than what they're told. Like they're allocated assigned roles. And so they can't do more than that role. They can't go outside of that. They can't. So they're constrained. And because of that, their prospects are constrained. Their abilities are being retarded. Their accomplishments are being kept low. And for the life of me, many people applaud that, because, it's wonderful if you keep, they're all equal. I said, yes, but they're all equally poor. I don't want a case where we're all equally poor. I want a situation where we can see the Usain Bolts and aspire to them. Because, if we allow him to run well, we'll create maybe another one or another two or another three or another 4 or 5 or 6, because he's able to do it. So, but I want to go back quickly to this because I don't want to miss a key point I wanted to make here. So let's just finish this up quickly.
Praised for its democratic stability, the West African nation of Senegal has seen its economy grow steadily over the past decade. With a GDP of around $27 billion, it's one of the more prosperous countries in the region. Senegal's economy is driven primarily by agriculture, tourism, and mining. Let's take a look at each of these key sectors. Agriculture employs over 70% of Senegal's labor force. The main crops are peanuts, millet, and rice. Senegal was once one of the leading producers of peanuts in the world. While peanut production has decreased, it's still a major export. Fishing is also important, with Senegal possessing a long coastline along the Atlantic Ocean. When it comes to industry, phosphate mining has been crucial. Senegal has some of the largest phosphate reserves in the world. Phosphate from mines in the interior of the country is transported to coastal refineries for export. Mining alone accounts for over 10% of GDP. Over the last 15 years, tourism has emerged as a fast-growing industry. With miles of beaches, Senegal has become a popular beach destination. The capital Dakar attracts many visitors along with nature reserves and parks such as Djoudj National Bird Sanctuary. Tourist numbers continue to rise each year. Senegal has a mostly liberalized economy with some state-owned enterprises. The government has undertaken economic reforms to encourage foreign investment. This includes public-private partnerships for major infrastructure projects. It is politically stable compared to some neighbors. While still a developing country, Senegal's economic expansion looks set to continue. The government hopes to achieve emerging market status soon. With new oil discoveries offshore, extractives will further power growth. Of course, challenges remain, such as income inequality and poverty reduction, but
A quick comment on this. I want to get your thoughts on the matter of two things: mining and three things: mining, tourism, and oil. How is that affecting? How do you see mining as a key part of Senegal's GDP and its economy? Is that working out well for the people, or is it? I'm asking because in my country here in Jamaica, I do not subscribe to mining as a key part of our economy. It has meant a lot of deforestation, a lot of damage to our ecology, a lot of problems with our water, impacting our water quality, air quality, displacements of farmers. Now, we're not as fortunate as you to have a large tract of land. We're a small island relative to you. We're about 10,000 square miles as opposed to yours, much, much bigger. But how do you see mining as a key part of Senegal's economy?
Yeah. So I have to say that out of this whole video, Joseph, this part is the one that makes me the most angry. And I will tell you why. Because this is a part where they make you, if you, and I understand, they're trying to talk about African nations, from all the positive side, because always you hear the problems. I get it. But we also need to stop the sugarcoating, okay? We need to tell each other the truth. And so when I see this, they make it sound like if you're just from the outside, you think, oh, things are going great and Senegal is growing. Well, I can tell you the Senegalese are not feeling the any of this. They're not. We have not had this many boats, people trying to migrate away. I mean, the amount of boats and the amount of people that are trying to leave, I've never seen it this high. I've never seen this in my whole life. This is accelerating. It's more and more. Something is going on. And this is not trickling, but if you pay attention, what did they talk to you about? Agriculture, primarily peanut ground. They talked to you about fishing. They talked to you about phosphate and the mining in general. And then they talked about tourism. Well, the first three that I talked about, agriculture, the fishing and the phosphate and the mining, it's all extractive resources. It's all natural resources. Nothing is transformed. But phosphate, they talk about the village where I operate from, actually the train tracks that are taking the phosphate away passes through our village, right? And so you are not gonna develop your nation with natural resources and resource extraction. It just doesn't work like that.
You're destroying it, actually.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
You're extracting the very wealth and leaving it here.
Yeah. So just extracting it and sending it away. That's not how we're going to make it. We have to try and transform in country. But the minute you talk about really transforming, it means that you have to really have an enabling business environment. And they're also in the report, I saw them talking about these reforms and all of that. These reforms are peanuts. We need a sea change. I mean, the level of reforms we need right now, they're doing this you can't even see what they're doing. But for them, we're doing reforms. But
so they're sugarcoating it. They're really, what they're doing is they're trying to make you feel good while they continue the extraction.
Exactly. So the extraction, the problem I have with a lot of these extractions, such as you, is because oftentimes it's done with not much concern for the environment, because in nations like ours, they can get away with all of it. I'm more, but there's a type of mining that I really would like to see happen more. And I'm actually talking to a company that has a really great technology. That's what I would call artisan mining. Like, I think we should really try to look into artisan mining, where it stays at the community level. It's little units. The mining unit maybe is the size of one room, and also this one here, the one we're talking about too, has a state-of-the-art technology in terms of completely respecting the environment. I mean, it's amazing, and they're winning award after award. I would be more for things like that, and also a situation where the community, every single member in the community, is getting a check. Just like in Alaska. The residents of Alaska, they get a check at the end of the year. Each one of them, baby, mom, everybody gets a check. This is your share of the oil and gas, of the oil that was, exploited here. So I would love to see things like that, because right now, all of this mining that they talk about, 10% of a GDP, well, you know what? We're not seeing that. It's really not trickling down back to us. So that's number one. And then they talk about tourism. Yeah, right, whatever. So my point is, here, you see all of these industries that they talk to you about. It's really not industries that that's not how a country becomes rich. A country becomes rich when its entrepreneurs are able to enterprise and transform things. And here, when they talk about the reforms, a lot of the reforms and saying we attract foreign direct investment, what happens is, when these multinationals and the people from abroad come in, we give them tons of exoneration. We give them tons of like all the things, but all the rules and regulations, they make me jump through. All of these things have attached to my neck. When the multinational shows up, they're like, "There's no way I'm gonna put myself through this nonsense that you're putting my dad through." You
So
can do that with
the multinationals are exempted from the pain and suffering that the people go through regulatory wise. And so they're able to do very well. And by the way, they come in with the capital and they take the capital back out, right? Because let's say they invested in the mining operations, billions of dollars, to put equipment and all this stuff in place. They then extract it. They earn this wonderful profits. They're not domiciled in your country, so the profits leave the country anyways. And you get the small payroll taxes that come from the people that you do.
And all the pollution. And all the pollution.
Yeah, whether it's air, water, and also the health cost, because many of your people are impacted health-wise, and you don't even see it immediately, right? You just gradually are feeling it in your health, your hospitals, because people are coming with this problem, cancers that you don't even know about, right? Yeah. So basically, they are not building your economy, as you're saying here. The way to build the economy is to create an economy where the indigenous people, the people who are there, are able to be true entrepreneurs. And you also have to make sure you have the human capital for that as well, because an entrepreneur who cannot find people to employ with the competences that they need is not going to be able to get very far. You know, you're trying to do this wonderful project. You need somebody who knows mathematics really well, or somebody who knows computer science very well, but you don't have them because of what we discussed earlier on. The education system is failing.
Exactly. And then I'll bring up something else that many people don't think about. But you remember in the piece they're talking about agriculture, and they were telling you how it's primarily groundnut. Okay. My country, and remember when they said, when the economy part started saying liberalized economy, blah blah blah, whatever. So, okay, Joseph. Did you know that in my country, that groundnut they talk about, did you know that the price of that groundnut is actually decided by the state? Every single year it decides the price of a groundnut. And you can't sell your groundnut for more than what they have come up with, and they usually try. I mean, it's insane.
Of course,
so it's insane.
It's price control.
Yes, and the price of bread is controlled. The price and the weight of bread is controlled and decided by the state. I mean, I'm telling you, most of these nations of ours, even the ones who claim to be capitalist, as you know, there's always a
degree. There's a degree, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So where most of our nations are that claim to be free market, they're like borderline free market and socialism. Like it's like this thing. Yeah. So because how else do you describe a country like mine? Where do you have a price of bread fixed by the government? The price of groundnut fixed by the government? And it's like that about many things.
And I
Many
don't think most people don't understand the impact of price fixing. Because, and of course, if you have a bad education system, then they're definitely not going to know. For example, if you fix the price of any product, you either create scarcity, or you create an over demand, or you cause people to stop doing it. Because if you
there's
fix
no
the
money in
price
it.
if you fix the price at X and my effort is greater than X, then there's no point for me to do that.
Exactly.
But this is a government doing that to its own people.
Yeah. So this is the government doing it. But you know the problem is, Joseph,
Yeah.
our people don't see a problem with it. Instead of
But they
saying
don't know
government, butt out of our business. Let
They
us.
work of it. They ask
I'm the
for
one
it.
who is producing. Yeah, leave me alone. No, do you know what they say? Their only complaint is, well, the government should be paying more. The price should go up. That's all they care
Absolutely.
about. The price should go up.
But to be fair to them, though, Magatte, to be fair to the people, right? They have been kept ignorant. You're an exception. You and others of us, even in my country here, what you're talking about, the majority of my people don't have a clue. We have a government that fixed the price of electricity, right? So,
Yeah.
and by the way, they try to stifle you going to alternative energy with regulations, right?
Of course.
So they limit you. Yeah. So thank you for putting all of that optimism into perspective for us, Magatte. Really appreciate that. And by the way, all that you're saying are things that I'm sure that all of my listeners are going to be benefiting from, because you're touching on the very things that affect our country. I think your country is in a worse position than ours in terms of the extent of the regulations, but we are very cunning in Jamaica. Our leaders are even far more cunning in the way that they build these regulations. I want to show you a comparison between the two countries. How much do you know about Jamaica? Do you know a lot about Jamaica?
A little bit, just a tiny bit. I just discovered recently that Kamala Harris's dad actually played a big
Yes.
role in your economy because he was advising your PM. I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Many years ago, fortunately. Sorry, I had to say that. But here is a chart on comparing Senegal and Jamaica. So the two countries here. Lovely flag, by the way. I like your country's flag.
Thank you.
Can you tell us what it means? Do you know?
I like our flag too, and I like yours too.
Thank you. Can you tell me what it means, the colors and design of your flag?
Green represents Islam, the country's main religion, as well as hope and progress. Yellow, the country's natural wealth and the wealth derived from labor. Red represents the independence struggle. Yeah, why not? Yeah. Okay, I remember now. And red.
And what's the star? What's the star?
Red, it's for knowledge, light, and perfection. 5 points of a star may also represent the Serer, cosmogonical, and religion star Unir, which symbolizes the universe, good fortune, and destiny.
Okay, good. All right, thank you so much for sharing that. On the Jamaica side, if I now that I'm wondering if I remember, but the black, I believe, if my memory serves me right, represents the strength of the people. The green stands for our hope and agricultural resources, and the yellow, which is really not yellow, it's supposed to be gold. The gold stands for the beauty and wealth of the sunshine. So normally we say hardship there are, but the land is green and the sun shineth. So that's the idea behind that.
No wonder I love it.
Yeah, it's lovely. So here we have some comparisons quickly. So Jamaica is 10,990 square kilometers, while your country is 196,000, right? Square kilometers, which is tremendous.
Yes.
We're a parliamentary democracy under a constitutional monarchy. You're a presidential republic. What is that? What is a presidential republic? It simply means that you elect a president nationally every year. Yeah.
Yeah. Every 5 years now.
Every 5 years.
Yes.
It was 7 years before at one point, right?
Right. At some point, it changed with Macky Sall. So Macky Sall, it's when Macky Sall came in power in 2012. That's when he had his first mandate was 7 years, but the second one was 5 years, simply because he ran on that promise of shortening the mandate from
Okay.
7 to 5. And once he got into power, instead of doing what he said he was going to do, that's when we found out, oh, the Constitutional Court says I'm not allowed to do this. Well, perhaps you should have checked with them before you promised this. But anyway, so we forced him to do, I mean, we still held him to what he said. And the second mandate, that one got down to 5 years. So since him, it's been 5 years now for everybody.
Makes sense. Okay. So
yeah, and also the and also so go ahead.
Is it a real republic, by the way? I mean, I guess, and the reason I asked this, right? I know many countries use the word republic in their names. Like you have the Chinese Republic, and you have the Asian Republic. So you're a real republic, right?
No, we are. I really think that from that standpoint, yeah, we are a real
republic.
Yeah.
Where Jamaica is about to become a republic. And
oh, really?
Yeah, which means for us here and the leaders that are leading us, a republic for them means that we're no longer going to be under the monarchy. So what we're going to do, right now we have a prime minister and we have a governor general. The governor general represents the king of England now as the monarchy. So what they're going to do, they're going to change the name of the governor general from governor general to president. And for the most part, we'll keep everything else the same way. The constitution that we have is really a colonial constitution that we got from the time of the colonizers. So for me, that's not a republic. You're not changing anything, really. So I want them to see a republic the way you have described, the way you want the country to operate, which is where we respect the sovereignty of the individual. To me, you don't have a real republic until you're respecting the sovereignty of the individuals, and your laws protect that sovereignty, which then limits government, so that government has less of an ability to constrain your freedom to trade with each other and with the rest of the world effectively. So for me, that's when you have a true republic. And that's why I kind of, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say in principle, we have a republic, but then
paper,
at least in principle we do. But you and I know it's all, the devil is in the details.
It's a facade, really. Okay, good. So continuing with our quick analysis of the two countries, let me get this back up here. Whoops, let's do it this way. Now looking at the two countries, population 2.8 million for us in Jamaica, 17 million for you.
18 now.
18 million now, right? Good. And your inhabitants per square kilometer, we have 257 persons per square kilometer. You have 90. So really, you have a lot of space relative to your population size, which is really good.
We do.
Life expectancy, we're at 69, you're at 65. For males, females, 73 for us, 70 for you. Average age, 30.9 for us, 19. So you have a very young population.
Very
young population.
Extremely. It's all of Africa. It's all of Africa. The average age in most of Africa right now is 19.
Wow. Now, what is the implication of that?
Long story. I mean, the implications are going to be very. That's, I think, a part of that is why you're seeing a lot of these boats going, because when you have this many young people and where the job prospects are not growing, it means that many more kids are trying to get the hell out. You know what I mean? And so
the economic model and even the governance model that your country has embraced, and many African countries, has stifled the productivity and the prosperity of the nation, which then leaves this massive amount of young people without the work, without the opportunities to absorb your skills and talents, and now you create a migration problem. And so the thing is, those who are trying to help us in Africa, the rest of the world is trying to help us. The real help that we needed is really for us in Africa, or African descendants, if you will, for us to understand the world, understand economics, and change our own future by the way we operate our countries.
That's exactly right. And the beauty of this, Joseph, which is, it's not only, to me, it's a double-edged sword, what you just said. Because the simplicity of it, and it really is.
Yeah.
And the fact that it doesn't require much. Oftentimes it's the stroke of a pen.
Well, that's the problem, because they can't afford for us to know it's that simple. Because what will happen, Magatte, in my country and yours, if they were to approach it the way you just described, the fact that it's really very simple, they would lose in their mind power. Because when you pile on this regulation and all of this cumbersome institution on the people, you who are in charge, you have power.
Yeah. Except that, no, and I understand, and I think it's a very short, but I think that I feel like it's very short-sighted, and I think that way of looking at it, it's actually coming to its term, to its
natural end. It's eating on itself.
Yes.
What they've done, Magatte, they have maintained the master-slave economic structure. The very structure that brought an end to the slave trade and to the end to chattel slavery, because that system eventually began to implode, right? Because it became gradually no longer economical. And that's what's happening to all these countries.
It doesn't work anymore, and also the kids now have access to, thanks to these guys, they are seeing what else happening in the world. They know that their conditions it shouldn't be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. And I think that African leaders really need to wake up to the fact that this expiration date of that way of looking at things and thinking, if I only can keep them down, then I keep the control. I mean, there is a revolution coming their way. I don't know if you've been following what's going on in Kenya with Ruto Must Go. I mean, these people need to be careful, because this wave that's going to go above them, like, it's going to be like a tsunami, and nothing and no one will stand when that comes. And so this is the good news, Joseph. I've been speaking to several African leaders, so far 10 of them, and I've been talking to them about what is my bold solution. Basically, my bold solution are these prosperous cities. These are next generation special economic zones that have their own law, their own governance when it comes to business, to the business environment. And so the best way to think about it is with the leader of these nations, because there are some smart ones. There are some smart ones, and there are also some that are like, look, at this age, I'm ready for legacy. It's just like, they know it's legacy, and they also, and some others are like, we also know that what happened before, we cannot continue this way, because the youth is, especially Gen Z is wild, okay, as they should be. And so we have a few leaders that are saying, this is a great idea, Magatte. So basically the idea is to carve out a piece of land the size of a city in a given nation, and that piece of land is literally barren land. It's greenfield. There's nothing going on because people decided there's nothing here, right? And they're all in the country. They're all in the capital cities and bigger cities, but everybody deserted these lands. There's nothing going on, and so on a rather unoccupied plot of land, the government says, okay, here we are mandating you to design the best business environment that can be designed worldwide. And so there, with our team, we create the best business environment, and the goal is to rank within the top 10 business. And if this zone was its own thing and measured like its own thing, it would be in the top 10 on the Doing Business Index rankings, up there with Denmark, Singapore, places like that. And so this is the initiative that I'm working on right now. This is my most ambitious initiative ever. This is my most bold initiative ever. And I'm very happy to report that there are a few leaders that for various reasons are like, I get it, let's do it. And they like to do it this way because they're the first ones to tell you, look, we know we need reforms, and we need serious reforms. The reforms we need is not just here. It's like massive. It's almost like if we had to tear down the whole place.
From scratch.
But who do you think is going to allow you to tear it all down? People have built lives upon these systems. They have. And so they're saying, Yeah, exactly. And so they're saying, and also imposing people, even if it's supposed to be better for them, for you to come and try to impose things to
Yeah.
people, it doesn't work. So
No.
what we're doing here is on this rather unoccupied piece of land where you don't disturb anybody, you don't disturb anything. You go there, the government asked you to build a great business environment, and then you're in charge of everything. You build the roads, you build the sewage system, you build everything. And then people are hearing, in this place, nobody's going to shake you down. There's no corruption. There is no red tape. There is the electricity works and is super cheap and affordable, reliable at a cost you can afford. All of these things. And it's built for entrepreneurs to come and enterprise. So entrepreneurs come enterprise, but jobs are created. And also we want to make sure that these are places where people can live, play, and work. So not just like these typical zones where it's like factories everywhere. No,
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
trying
yeah.
to exactly. So that's
It's a
kind of what
real, it's a
that's what
real
I've
ecosystem for living. Yeah.
exactly. So that's what
Yeah.
I've been involved with most recently, and I'm
Mhm.
hoping that a few months from now we can announce the first country where we're going to be building the first city. But this is the reason why I've been so excited, because you know what is going to happen, Joseph? 1, 2, 3 cities like that, and it works.
Oh yeah,
The
yeah.
others will start to copy.
Even though, to be honest, we have an example of such a city. It's called Singapore.
I know,
Um,
but
you
yes,
know,
you got it.
I've
You
never
got it.
been there.
Exactly.
I've never been there before. I've never been.
Yes, I have not. It's so funny. I love Singapore, and I have not gone yet. So there's a friend of mine who is very close to the rulers of Singapore. It's like, Magatte, you need to come visit. After everything you talk about, you seem like you know.
Yeah.
And she's like, you just now need to come visit. So I'm gonna go visit, but not yet. But
So
everything I know about place, the studies, and it's just amazing. And
everything you
another.
know, everything you know is correct. My wife and I went there, and we were just blown away. I mean, you don't want to leave the country. You want to spend the rest of your life there. If you didn't have any other reasons to leave, you would just literally throw in the towel and just stay and never leave. It
No,
was
it's amazing.
absolutely everything you have seen is exactly what it is. It's the most well managed, well maintained, freest economic country in the
In the
world.
world.
The quality of life is next to nothing you've ever seen before in any country. The US
No,
is no comparison. Canada,
no,
where I've lived, is no comparison.
no.
It's Sweden is no comparison. The Netherlands is no comparison. It's an
That's amazing.
absolutely beautiful country. You know,
So now
you
you
can,
so
you know, yeah.
So now you made me, but
So
I have to go. But for me, of course, I've watched a lot of interviews of Lee Kuan Yew. I have
yes,
watched, obviously, because I just have spent so much time in Singapore researching the whole thing, and it all started with that book, also from third to
from
first.
third world to first world, yes.
From third to first, his book. And it's just, I'm just in love with the vision. I'm in love with everything he's done. And then another one also to take a look at is Dubai, that one
Yes,
I went
yes,
to and everything.
yes.
And the Sheikh and the vision that he had as well. I mean, these guys are nothing short but amazing. And so all of this, that's what I tell these leaders, these African leaders, because we try to help them connect the dots. I say, look, this is not something crazy. It's been tried before. And every
Exactly.
time it's been tried, it works. China is
In
the
my
latest one.
country, in my country, people are like, wow, that sounds so utopic. I'm like, it's not. It's already done. You know, it's already done. You know, it's. I'm not making this up. It's there.
No,
You
no,
know. You know.
no,
But
no.
let's continue our comparison here. Just to
Mhm.
quickly go through, because I want to kind of. I'm going somewhere with this. So here's our birth rate in Jamaica is 11.71%. Yours is very high, 32.5%, which is really, good, I guess, right? The death rate for us is higher than yours because we have a serious homicide problem here in Jamaica. 5.5. Migration rate, notice we are having a net migration rate of 3.89%. You're at minus 1.13%. But based on what you just said, that's probably getting higher now, isn't it?
Oh, I'm suspicious of the numbers and where they came from. That's my answer to
Yeah.
that one.
Okay, got it. Just scrolling down here, looking at unemployment rate, it says 2.9%. I'm surprised. Ours is at 4.4%.
I need to know where those numbers. They're not. Most people
connecting for you?
don't even know that they're unemployed. They don't go point. This, you see,
Exactly.
that's the thing. It's just like, yeah, I don't trust those numbers. I would love to see where they got it from.
Right, right. Okay, cool. All right, so I won't spend any more time on this, but basically I had to do a little comparison to see how the two countries are doing to get a flavor for it based on this, taking the, I like to look at GDP per capita because that's a very, very good, or one of the good indicators. Or in this case, they have the average income, which is 6,150 US per annum versus 1,660. So it seems as if wages are very, very low in
Super
both
low.
countries and even much lower in Senegal,
Yeah,
right?
in mine it's much lower. We're right now getting close to 2,000, but it's much low. Yeah, we're
Yeah,
much lower than you guys. And
so
we
that's
have not,
really,
and the sad thing is we have not moved much since our independence, since our, yeah, we have not moved much.
so I want to shift the conversation now to the topic. So the topic for this discussion is emancipating ourselves, and we've begun
Oh,
to talk.
Joseph, Joseph, so sorry. Do you know
Yeah,
how much longer? Because I
well,
thought it was going to take an hour, and then, but it's fine. I mean, because I think we're
30,
supposed to.
24 minutes. 24 minutes. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. And I'm so sorry because it should be an hour, but we got kind of carried away in the first part to talk about.
Okay. It's just because I'm supposed to. Yeah, but anyway, okay, that's fine.
I'm so sorry. So we're gonna wrap it up in maybe less than 24 minutes. But
Okay,
you've done very well so far. This has
that'd
been
be
really
great.
good. So the topic is emancipating ourselves, and I want to know kind of, and you have touched on it already in different ways.
Yeah.
Do you think Africans in Africa and in the diaspora, like myself, need to do what Bob Marley says to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery because none but ourselves can free our minds? I know the answer already, but answer it for me. Do you think we need to have a mental emancipation if we're going to move forward as both individuals and as a collective?
Absolutely. Yes, I don't. I completely think we need to emancipate ourselves, and
Mhm.
you know, it's just the best way to think about it, because we think about emancipation and we think we are emancipated. But I was talking to Eli Steele, very interesting gentleman. He's an African American here that I know from here. I interviewed him for my show, and he said to me he wonders if Black people know how to be free.
Mm.
And I think he made sense because I look around and oftentimes I feel like we just really don't know what to do with our freedom, because in a way we have freedom, but
Mhm.
we are still stuck. And
We have the capacity. We have the capacity to be free.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
think we have, by virtue of our leaders, we have kept ourselves enslaved.
Mm.
So, for
It's
example, in your country, what
mhm.
have we done with our education system to free our people? We have maintained an education system that maintains an enslaved mindset. In our economy, what have we done to free our people? We have maintained structures that enslave our people. In terms of our international relations, what kind of agreements and partnerships have we entered into? Those that are extractive and those which maintain a system. Do you agree with that? Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I'm seeing that, and I have to say that two things. I think we have to try and separate the elements where we have to rely, where it's like, okay, these deals that they're signing, it's not like you, Joseph, gets to even have a say, or me. Although we could, but we would need to be many of us making some noise for something to really happen. It's not something where we have to. So there are those things where sadly those people are making decisions on our behalf, and they're not really counting us. They're not counting for our interest, and they're just looking at how much bribe they can get from the other party, so they're not negotiating for us. And sadly, though, they're the ones with a pen and do whatever they and oftentimes we don't know. And there I would argue that a couple things we could do is some of us being a little bit more curious about what's going on, some of us paying more attention to those type of things. But oftentimes what I see, I don't know in your country, but in my country, in many sub-Saharan African nations, I see it. When you're on TV, an economist is on TV talking, the journalist doesn't even let them finish. And why? Is because that journalist is already bored. The minute they hear
Right.
about important stuff, data, things, they're bored. The only thing they want to hear about is scandals, you know. But other than that, they're not interested in hearing about like some of his data, some of his information, and what should we do about that, and all of that. They can't. They cut you off and they go to gossip crap. And if they don't cut you off, it's the audience, it's the person watching that already
Yes.
zapped to
Yeah.
something where singing and dancing. People are singing and dancing. So for things like that, yes, we don't have a pen to sign, but I argue that this is where we need to have agency again and really seek information ourselves. Try to understand what's going on and stop being always about dancing and chanting and just, you know, goofing off and playing around. We
So
need to start
basically, you're asking us, the ordinary men and women in the
people,
street,
us,
the
the
people,
ordinary people. Yes.
to decide to re-educate ourselves.
Yes. Yes.
You're asking us to take responsibility to think outside the box into which our culture
Yes.
and norms have placed us.
Yes. Because if
And-
we're not, because by now we
Yeah.
only have ourselves, Joseph.
Yeah.
We
But
only
it's a
have
poor
ourselves.
order. It's a bit of why I'm struggling with it a bit, because as I listen to you and as I look at you, I can tell that maybe a few things happened in your life which caused you to become aware of some things. I don't know what it is, but I know for myself, when I was like 7 years old, a British couple gave me a book. You know, they gave me a book as a gift because they were my neighbors for a bit and they're expatriates in my country. They gave me a book, and that book changed everything for me because I now was reading this book. And prior to them, my grandmother insisted that I read the newspaper headline before she gave me the comic strip. So she forced me to become a reader doing that in her small way. So my grandmother, that one action, and then some passerbyers giving me a book that says, "Tell me why," which pushed me to ask why for everything. So the book says, "Tell me why," and it asks questions and it tells you why, and it made you inquisitive. It must have been something for you. What is it that caused Magatte Wade to trip the switch? Because there are many Senegalese who have not flicked that switch in the brain that you had.
I mean, for me, it's funny you talk about your grandma, but my grandma definitely, and my dad also, I very much was raised with this concept of criticize by creating. So meaning that I'm not really allowed to complain about anything unless I have an alternative solution. And it was important for my parents to know that I don't have to have a right answer, but I sure should show up. If I'm going to go complain, I right away need to follow up with, and this is what I thought about to solve it. And so in my case, I've been trained in a way, and my grandma, I grew up, she's the one who raised me, especially when my parents were gone to Europe as economic migrants. Later, I was reunited with my parents. But in those early years, it's my grandma who really took care of me while I was in Senegal. And as a matter of fact, your readers can learn more. My book has The Heart of a Cheetah, but I will explain a little.
Hold it up again for me, please. Hold it up. Let me just make sure I see it.
The Heart of a
Heart
Cheetah.
Great.
Yeah.
That's your
Yeah.
book, written by
Yeah,
Magatte Wade.
yeah.
Beautiful.
It's
You
on
can get it
Amazon.
Right?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. And also for anybody who got the book and bought the book and wants a free link to the audiobook, which I read myself, we can have that too. But so in my case, my grandma was this person who my grandma raised me in a very special way, in a way where she never looked at me and thought that, oh, because you're this child, you're 5, you're 6, that, you know, I'm going to talk to you like you don't know what's going on. My grandma always respected my mind. And so she literally would talk to me as her equal. And, you know, I remember, even though I was very young, I remember she was very, very, very put me at her own level. And what that did, I think, is I never got really like I very much consider myself pretty much everybody's equal, like I don't look at people as if they're better than me. My grandma always said,
Mhm.
you're going to be as good as anybody, if not better. So that's pretty much the how she set it up for me. And she really modeled that for me, like she would have real conversations with me. And then my father then on top of that had this whole criticized by creating. And then I'm like, okay. And by now I think I'm just this person who, when there is an issue, I first try to understand the issue because I'm trying to find a solution. If you can't
Mhm.
find a solution, if you don't understand what the hell is going on, so I think I've been trained with that mind of
Mhm.
always, trying to understand, and I think it's a non-ending process. And once and it's just a way I've been trained.
Right.
But with that in mind, Joseph, I can understand that you have been fortunate enough that you got put on the right track for this, and I was as well. But the thing is, each one of us, we then have to take it upon ourselves to see if we can train others the same way. I can tell you,
Right.
for example, how does it manifest? I can tell you that any Senegalese person that has access to me, meaning that is in my world, in my life, is going to have to know what I know. It's just the way I am. And any African, as a matter of fact, anybody who wants to know. So the way it manifests in Senegal, for example, is all my employees, they know exactly all these things we talk about. We had movie crews come in and do films. Like just a few weeks ago, a new documentary got released called She Rises Up. It's about all of these issues, and I'm one of the people that the documentary follows. And we talk about how bureaucracy is stifling us as entrepreneurs on the ground. Like getting people, the audiences, to understand this. So my staff gets to see these movie people coming in. They're also participating because they're being interviewed. They're talking about the value of a job, why it matters, and therefore businesses, all of that
Mhm.
stuff. So I'm bringing this concept to people also around me. We have an entrepreneurial school, but I guess what? I mean, right now you have a 13-year-old discussing, basically George Orwell, and talking about
Mhm.
this
Yeah.
crazy
Yeah.
world we're in today. So basically, I'm doing for others what happened for me and what happened for you. So I don't expect most Senegalese people to change overnight. As a matter of fact, I know it will not. And I know that even if it's not overnight, even 100 years from now, it's not going to be even all people who change the way they should change. So in my